People usually ask the wrong questions when it comes to wealth. They ask, what can I do right now to make money? But the real question is, what decisions am I making today that my future self is going to thank me for, right? Because real wealth doesn't usually show up fast. It shows up quietly, and it usually rewards patience before it rewards effort. Most of the decisions that actually change your financial life don't feel impressive when you're making them. They feel boring, sometimes even uncomfortable. And a lot of times, nobody around you understands why you're doing what you're doing. But years later, those are the decisions that separate people who are financially stable from the people who are constantly stressed, right? So in this video, I want to walk through some of the wealth decisions that don't pay off immediately, but compound over time. And I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about mindset, positioning, discipline, and the way you move when nobody's watching. If you're new here, my name is Claudia. I'm the founder of Lane to Wealth. This channel is about building wealth slowly, intentionally, and with long-term thinking. Not shortcuts, not hype, and not pressure to look successful before you actually are, right? One of the very first wealth decisions that pays off years later is deciding to think long-term in a short-term world. That sounds simple, but it actually is one of the smartest, hardest things you can do, because everything around us is designed for immediacy, fast money, fast results, fast validation. Social media makes it look like everyone is winning instantly, but what you don't see is how fragile most of the success really is. When you decide to think long-term, you stop chasing what looks good right now and start building what still works later. You make choices based on sustainability instead of excitement. You're less reactive. You don't panic every time something doesn't work immediately. And that decision alone protects you from a lot of financial mistakes. Another wealth decision that pays off years later is learning before you earn. Most people want the reward before the responsibility. They want income without understanding. They want results without mastery. But the people who build lasting wealth usually invest time in learning before they ever see the money. They study how money actually works. They learn how businesses operate. They understand systems, not just outcomes. At the time, it can feel like you're behind, like everyone else is moving faster than you. But years later, that foundation gives you confidence because you're not guessing. You're informed, and informed people make calmer decisions. Another decision that pays off years later is choosing discipline over lifestyle upgrades. This one is uncomfortable, especially when you finally start making more money. It's tempting to immediately change your lifestyle. Bigger purchases, more convenience, more spending to reward yourself, but restraint early on creates options later. When you don't inflate your lifestyle every time your income increases, you give yourself breathing room, you create margin, you reduce pressure. And years later, that margin turns into freedom. Freedom to say no, freedom to pivot, freedom to take risks that other people can't afford to take, right? So another decision that compounds over time is learning how to be patient with growth, right? Most people quit too early, not because something wasn't working, but because it wasn't working fast enough, right? They underestimate how long things take to mature. Businesses take time, investments take time, skill takes time. It really does. And when you decide to stay consistent, even when progress feels slow, you're doing something most people won't do. You really are. Years later, that consistency, it stacks. And suddenly, what felt invisible becomes like undeniable, right? Another wealth decision that pays off later is choosing ownership over appearance. A lot of people look wealthy but don't own much, right? They rent their lifestyle, they lease their success. Ownership doesn't always look impressive at first. Owning assets, owning skills, owning systems, owning your time, these things don't get applause, but they create stability. And years later, ownership gives you leverage, while appearance just gives you expenses. It really does. A lot of expenses that you don't want. So another long-term wealth decision is learning how to separate emotion from money. Money decisions made emotionally are almost always expensive, right? Fear leads to hesitation. Ego leads to overspending. Comparison leads to poor timing. When you learn how to slow down, evaluate, and make decisions based on logic instead of feeling, you protect yourself from cycles of regret. And over time, that emotional maturity around money becomes one of your greatest assets, right? So another decision that pays off years later is surrounding yourself with people who think differently than you, right? Not people who pressure you, not people who compete with you, but people who challenge your perspective. When your environment expands, your thinking, your decisions, they also expand. You start seeing possibilities instead of limitations. You stop normalizing struggle. You stop thinking small without realizing it, right? And over time, your circle quietly reshapes your future. So that's amazing. One of the most underrated wealth decisions is choosing to stay humble enough to keep learning, right? Wealth doesn't reward arrogance, it rewards adaptability. The people who last are the ones willing to admit when they don't know something and willing to adjust when something changes. Markets change, industries change, life changes, right? And humility keeps you flexible. So years later, years down the line, flexibility is what keeps you relevant. Another decision that pays off years later is deciding not to rush your timeline just because someone else is ahead, right? I know we all like to compete, right? And that's like competing is the stiller of joy. Comparison speeds up mistakes. It really do. When you rush, you skip steps, you ignore warning signs, you move before you're ready. But when you allow your journey to unfold as its own pace, you make better decisions even if they take longer. And years later, that patience protects what you built. One of the most important wealth decisions you can make is deciding to build your life before you build your image. A lot of people reverse this. They focus on looking successful before they're actually stable. But when you build your life first, systems, habits, discipline, the image becomes irrelevant. And ironically, that's when things start working. So, lastly, one of the most powerful long-term wealth decisions is choosing alignment over pressure, right? Doing things that fit who you are, building in ways that make sense for your temperament, values, and capacity. When you're aligned, you don't burn out as easily. You don't resent your success. You don't feel trapped by what you've built. And years later, that alignment is what makes wealth sustainable, not just achievable. I want to thank you for being here truly, for staying until the end. If you subscribe, watch consistently, or supported this channel in any way, it means more than you know. It really does. My goal over the next few months is to reach 1,000 subscribers, and I would love your support in making that happen. I'll also be giving a surprise gift to one of my subscribers, and if you want something practical to help you get started, you can download my free ebook below, How to Build Your First Quiet Wealth Stream. So no pressure, no rush, just intentional decisions, the kind that pays off years later. So thank you for watching, and I hope you stay tuned in for my next video.